Okay, you've set the world alight, Dr. William Makis. Can I ask just before we start, where in Canada are you, and what made you become a doctor from the initial part? It's just to get some background.
I'm in Edmonton, Alberta right now, so in the Western province. What made me become a doctor? My
Mm.
my dad's a mathematician, so I was supposed to follow my dad's path into mathematics. And I did national mathematics competitions, international mathematics competition, but I preferred biology. And in high school, we actually did a dissection of a frog. And that's what got me fascinated into medicine. And then I was volunteering for 4 years at a hospital in downtown Toronto, St. Michael's Hospital. I was a porter. I would deliver patients to their appointments. I would deliver chest X-rays back when we still had the physical films and medications, and then eventually I got into medical school, and so that was my path in medicine.
And have you seen a change in your period as a doctor? Have you seen sort of the culture of the hospitals change?
Well, the culture of medical schools has changed, and the culture of medicine in general has changed. I think at the time when I was getting into medicine, which was 2001, 2001 to 2005, I was in medical school. There was already a shift away from sort of a merit-based background to they wanted more women in medicine, and so there was a lot more women that were being uh, brought into medical schools. And I think after that, the whole shift towards sort of a left-leaning political shift, with the whole health justice and diversity and inclusivity and all the buzzwords of the left. I think that was just starting around 2000, but I think it really kicked into gear around 2010. And now I don't even recognize the medical students that come out of the medical schools. They're a lot of them are very left leaning, and they're activists, they're political activists. You have residents who are attacking staff with decades of experience. I have some of my biggest attackers are students. They're residents, they're fellows, because they're activists and they believe that this activism is something that they should take up, despite the fact that they don't have experience and they haven't been out there working in the real world, but they are conducting activism.
Yeah. And what made you become an oncologist? What was the thing there? What was the interest?
I enjoy patterns, and I found myself, and I enjoy a lot of mathematics and physics, and so radiology, and specifically nuclear radiology oncology, working with radiation was something that really fascinated me in medical school. And so I found myself going into that field. And so I trained as a nuclear medicine radiologist and oncologist. And my practice initially, I had a general practice in a very small town in Manitoba in Canada. For a couple of years, I built up a nuclear medicine department. I was doing a lot of cardiac stress tests. I was doing a lot of bone density scans, bone scans, diagnosing arthritis, diagnosing heart disease, thyroid disease. And then I moved to Edmonton, Alberta to work at a large cancer center. And then my practice shifted purely to oncology.
Now, the thing that we reached out to you is we saw the post where you were talking about the rise in peculiar cancers that were sort of. Can you talk about that and how as a doctor you're looking at this, going, what's going on here?
I noticed this really almost as an accident. I'd initially started seeing Canadian doctors dying suddenly, vaccinated Canadian doctors collapsing, dying suddenly. And it was in late 2021 when I first noticed that doctors in their 40s and 50s were dying in their sleep, and they were dying a few days or a few weeks after they took their first booster shot. And if that's not a red flag for somebody, I don't know what is, because, you know, dying in your sleep, especially if you have no known health conditions, no known medical history, that is a huge red flag. People generally don't die in their sleep, especially young people in their 40s and 50s. And that got me on the journey of tracking sudden and unexpected deaths of Canadian doctors. Unfortunately, I was kicked out of Twitter. I was actually censored and banned off Twitter when I started raising concerns about COVID vaccines in kids 5 to 11 years old, because I had seen that parents didn't stand up to the vaccine rollout in kids 12 to 19. In Canada, parents just rolled over and very desperate push, both in Canada and United States, to get them out. So I was silenced for a year, and I was ready to just disappear off social media completely. And my wife convinced me to kind of stay on and keep fighting on. So I kept researching sudden deaths of Canadian doctors. I had a Getter account, and so I was getting my information out there. And I had noticed that although most of the sudden deaths of the vaccinated doctors were cardiac, and there was a small subset that were related to blood clots, so the strokes, the heart attacks, the pulmonary emboli, there was a significant subset of extremely aggressive cancers. And doctors in their 30s, 40s, 50s were being diagnosed with stage 4 cancers, and they were dying in less than a year. And it was, lung cancer, colon cancer, and it was a behavior that was completely unlike anything that I had been used to as an oncologist and as a radiologist as well. And so the more I looked into this phenomenon of these extremely aggressive cancers, this was, I'd say, mid-2022, that I had noticed this phenomenon. Then I realized people were calling it turbo cancers. And as anything, the more you look into it, the more you study it, patterns start to arise. And these were patterns that nobody else was talking about. And so I started publishing a lot of these cases on my Substack, and really talking about it, this phenomenon of these extremely aggressive cancers in vaccinated individuals that are behaving very differently than what we're used to.
Yes, Obi. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Paul.
I think what you've been doing, documenting these deaths, we have a thing around the world. There's been a bit of a spontaneous protest, memorials really, that pop up on bridges in France and in parks in Australia of pictures and small vignettes of vaccine injured and vaccine deaths. And I realized that your Substack and your Twitter account is really like a virtual forest. We call it Forest of the Fallen. And yes, it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to see image after image and story after story of these young, vital people. The doctors, some of the doctors that you're talking about, were running triathlons the day before. Right. And so you'd think, well, what hope does a slob like me have if these fit young athletes are falling? I was also very activated in 2021, trying to fight the 5 to 11-year-olds. I actually tweeted our health minister in August, and with the infection fatality rate for COVID, on the day the 24,000 school kids were being herded to get the synthetic gene shots. And I said, look, if you multiply that by the infection fatality rate, you expect 0 kids in this age group to die from COVID. So if there's even one death among the 24,000, you have a signal of harm, and you should be looking for this. And if you're not, you will be culpable. 2 hours later, the medical council ordered immediate suspension hearings for public protection. What happened next was that I sued them in the Supreme Court, and they had a change of heart and dropped the suspension. But it was obvious to me that there was like almost a 1,000-fold difference between the octogenarian, nonagenarian, and the young teenager in terms of risk, and yet they were treating them all the same, your work has been very important. It is heartbreaking. It's like a virtual forest of the fallen. But I notice you've also been involved in some very important research. I noticed the Hulscher, I believe you were one of the authors on the Hulscher paper, or the autopsy paper. Is that right?
Yes. And it's very hard because I've had my license taken hostage. I am being brought to courts on a routine basis. So any research that I do and I participating, I tell my wife it's like I have two hands tied behind my back and a blindfold on and a gun pointed to my head. It's doing research under these conditions, it's extremely difficult. Now, I've been fortunate to be able to collaborate with Dr. Peter McCullough and some of the other authors on that paper. We work together at the Wellness Company as well, and so I've had some opportunities to conduct peer-reviewed research, but it's been extremely limited and extremely difficult because I've been locked out of my office. I'm not permitted to diagnose or treat cancer patients. I'm constantly being threatened by lawyers from either Alberta Health Services or the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Alberta. So it's an extremely difficult situation to be in. And on top of that, anyone who tries to do this kind of research in Canada, any doctor is going to have their license stripped from them. They're going to have their hospital privileges canceled. They're going to have their job. They're going to be fired from their job. And so the crackdown on dissident doctors, especially in Canada, is very extreme.
Yes,
how do they justify it? I mean, how do they, and why aren't the people rising up and going, hey, what are you doing? This doctor's researching why all these people are suddenly dying and you're shutting him down. Aren't the people or members of other doctors coming up and backing you up saying, no, this is important work? Or are they all just staying silent?
So the way the colleges justify it is they'll just put it under this broad label of unprofessional conduct. And again, which again, these are very vague terms. You can call anything misinformation, right? And the colleges, in Canada, they are actually private corporations. So there are private corporations in Canada that control the medical licenses of 100,000 doctors. These private corporations are run by corrupt lawyers and corrupt health bureaucrats, none of whom are elected, none of whom are being supervised by the provincial governments. So they are actually completely independent entities. There is zero supervision from the political. So the Ministry of Health, let's take the Alberta Minister of Health cannot tell the college what to do. She can't even step into the offices of the college because they might throw her out or they might not even let her in. These are completely autonomous entities that have deep contacts with the pharmaceutical industry. They have deep contacts with the elite in the province. So in Alberta, it would be the biggest law firms. They have judges on their payroll that have been bribed and corrupted. They have protection of the police. It is a very nice network of very powerful individuals. And we can elect whatever government we want. The government will not touch them. And that is the sad state of affairs.
We have the same structure here. There's so many similarities between what's happened in Canada, what's happened in Australia, New Zealand, in the UK. It makes it very hard to get justice. I think we've been throwing the data out continuously for 3 years, and we feel like we've won the war on facts and data. So now we're starting to. Michael's talking about a a new cultural renaissance where we snap out of the wokeness and the insanity.
Exactly, and
It seems over
in
here.
terms of the wokeness has really infected in the medical institutions, and it's also, the bureaucracy is corrupt, and the bureaucracy has very much been co-opted by the left. And we see that in our medical institutions, in that, and I'm sure it's the same in Australia, it's the same in New Zealand. Can you name one mainstream medical association or medical institution that stood up against the narrative and said, this is wrong, these are violations of the Hippocratic Oath, violations of medical ethics, violations of bodily autonomy, the idea that you're not allowed to prescribe early treatments for COVID patients, you're not allowed to provide mask or vaccine exemption letters, for example. There's not a single mainstream medical institution, I can tell you, in Canada that stood up against the narrative. Not one, which means that they're all co-opted. Yeah. And so we need, if we're talking about a sort of a change in culture or a renaissance, we're going to need new institutions. We're going to, these institutions are either going to have to be dissolved, broken down, or they're going to have to become irrelevant as new institutions arise in their place, because these institutions are rotten top to bottom. And we see that they adopted the narrative, all of them uniformly adopted the narrative of whether it's the vaccine narrative or the pandemic narrative. None of them stood up and went against the government-approved narratives.
One of my crimes was to talk about early treatment. I was talking about early treatment from 2020 when I realized hydroxychloroquine and vitamin D, zinc, and zinc ionophores would work, and we didn't have to be fearful. But no one could hear me, and I repeated it so often that I felt I wasn't a doctor anymore. I'd become like a minister or a priest or a lama of early treatment. And I would bless everyone in the name of the holy horse paste, the hydroxy, the vitamin D, the zinc, the quercetin and the zinc ionophores, and the mysterious melatonin. I bless you. And then I have a C at the end now for vitamin C. But what's fascinating, though, is that a lot of these approaches to COVID treatment also bled over to be very useful in vaccine injury treatment.
Yes.
And I'm seeing that these same approaches, a lot of them overlap with treatment, new approaches to cancer treatment. And the mother of my children unfortunately got the shot, developed non-Hodgkin's lymphoma earlier this year. And I was, so I was waiting for an approach that I could trust. She went for the traditional chemo and radiation, and thankfully she got through it, but it's awful stuff.
It is.
It is really, really toxic, awful stuff. And then Paul Merrick did that wonderful monograph on cancer care, 160 pages, and suddenly I felt, wow, we have a metabolic approach that makes sense to the treatment of cancer. I was wondering what you thought about all that.
Well, when just to address the issue of the early treatments, we had here in Alberta, Canada. Now, Alberta Health Services is the largest health authority in Canada. It employs about 100,000 healthcare workers. It may be one of the largest in North America. And what I'd noticed very early on, they had a scientific advisory group for COVID-19, and that scientific advisory group put out recommendations that effectively said vitamin D doesn't work, and we know it does. We know that high-dose vitamin D is very helpful, even in severe COVID cases and hospitalizations. It shortens hospitalization stay. It reduces your risk of ending up in the intensive care unit, reduces risk of death. And they smeared vitamin D. They said it doesn't work as a prophylactic. It doesn't work for treatment of COVID-19. They smeared hydroxychloroquine and they smeared ivermectin. And they said that those are useless for COVID-19, should not be used. And those recommendations were put out just as they were started rolling out the COVID-19 vaccine. So we saw a very coordinated effort from these corrupt bureaucracies to shut down any possibility of early treatment. And I'll give you an example. Dr. Daniel Nagasi, who was an emergency physician in Alberta, he worked part-time in Alberta doing locums. He actually tried to treat 3 patients with ivermectin who had showed up in his emergency room. And within 24 hours, now, you know that bureaucracy normally moves extremely slowly. You know, you'd have to take weeks and months to get anything done by these bureaucrats. But when it came to ivermectin, within 24 hours, his entire schedule had been changed. All his emergency shifts were canceled. He was, targeted by the bureaucrats saying, you're not allowed to work in Alberta anymore. He was stripped of his hospital privileges, and they came after his medical license within 24 hours. That is how laser focused these countries like Canada, and I'm sure something similar, was going on in Australia, New Zealand, UK. This is how laser focused they were on shutting down any possibility of early treatment. This to me is far beyond incompetence. This is malice.
Yes.
This is malice. The health authorities in these countries did everything possible to drive up COVID-19 deaths, to drive up the death count, especially in 2020. I believe there was an intent to drive up the death count so that they could then justify, the emergency authorizations for the vaccines and then push the vaccine using fear tactics on the entire population, as they did in early 2021.
And as an anesthesiologist, I would show my registrars the trolley with all the anesthetic drugs, and I would say, everything here is a poison. Everything is a toxin, but it's always a question of the dose and the sequencing. So even pure water, if you get it as an excess, will kill you. You don't think of pure water as toxic. And then dioxin, a few molecules will kill you. That's, the most toxic. Now, ivermectin is probably unequivocally the safest drug that's out there. It's closer to pure water than Panadol. Then I think on Nutri-Vigilance, it's even safer than vitamin C. So the idea that doctors were attacked, like you're saying, Dr. Nagasi, here we have Dr. Miley Trin, who had the audacity to treat patients with ivermectin, to save their lives with ivermectin. So you've got this conflict between a drug which is so safe, and yet apparently so dangerous to the agenda.
Exactly. And, the fact that even pharmacies would not fill prescriptions from doctors for ivermectin, for example, I mean, that is a crime. I don't know how else to describe it. And, I don't like to throw around words loosely, but that is a crime that the pharmacy would basically be able to interfere in a doctor's care for their patient, but because it fit the narrative, they were allowed to commit those crimes. They were permitted to, without any kind of penalty, to not fill those prescriptions for ivermectin, for example. You mentioned something fascinating in terms of how it has turned out that ivermectin is this fantastic antiviral, has tremendous antiviral properties, not just antiparasitic, but it has documented, peer-reviewed research proven antiviral properties. And again, not just for coronaviruses, for influenza, for other viruses. And it has proven anti-cancer properties, many anti-cancer properties. And so now it becomes this interesting agent that can help the vaccine injured. It can help those suffering from long COVID. And I do believe that there is a subset of people suffering from long COVID. Now, of course, most of those people end up getting vaccinated and end up probably exacerbating their symptoms, or they develop new symptoms, which they attribute to, the feeling unwell, that they may have felt unwell after their initial COVID infection. Of course, after 2-3 doses, now you come up with new side effects and everything gets attributed to long COVID. But it's helpful with those suffering from true long COVID. And it definitely will probably has a role in treating or addressing some of these extremely aggressive cancers that are arising in the vaccinated. The problem there is that no one will dare do the trial. No one will be allowed to do the proper trials, especially in these vaccinated people presenting with stage 4 cancers. So it's up to the individual themselves to take that bodily autonomy back into their own hands and say, you know what, the medical establishment has failed me. I ended up with these toxic COVID-19 vaccines. Now I have a stage 4 cancer. It is behaving extremely aggressively. The oncologists have tremendous difficulty managing these turbo cancers, these aggressive stage 4 cancers in vaccinated individuals. They try all the standard conventional treatments, and those treatments often fail. And sometimes they will achieve, a remission. Sometimes the cancers will respond, but often they don't. And the prognosis seems to be extremely poor. This is what I'm trying to raise awareness of with my Died Suddenly posts on Twitter, with my Substack articles, and as you beautifully pointed out, my work is it is like a virtual, Forest of the Fallen, or it is almost like a snapshot of the clinical damage that is happening in the broader population, and that is what this big pharma cartel does not want. Articles they can dismiss, like for example, our autopsy article has been rejected over a dozen times because they can just not allow autopsy evidence of sudden deaths in COVID vaccinated people. They cannot allow it to be published. And so we're facing rejection after rejection after rejection with usually no explanation. They'll just say, well, this is not something that we want to even consider publishing. So they can tamper with and mess around with the research, but when it comes to the actual clinical cases, they don't want people to see these cases. And that is why I think it's so important to put these cases front and center and show this is the damage that people are suffering.
Can I ask, what are some of how young are you seeing the cancers in people, and how aggressive are they in the young people you're seeing?
So it varies with the cancer type. The youngest ones are going to be the lymphomas, leukemias. The youngest that I've seen where I had confirmation that they took the vaccine and several months later developed the cancer was 12 years old. That is the youngest that I've seen, was 12 years old, and this was actually a brain cancer, a high-grade glioblastoma, brain cancer that developed about 4 months after a first Moderna shot in a 12-year-old boy in the Philippines. You will see the leukemias and lymphomas typically in the late teens, and of course in the 20s and 30s. The leukemias, some of them seem to be extremely aggressive. In terms of diagnosis to death, it's a matter of weeks, days, sometimes even hours.
For a layperson, I mean, I know you're an oncologist, but for a layperson, leukemia that is that aggressive and can take someone out that quickly, that's unusual.
It is unusual. Yes, I mean you would expect a better prognosis than that. That is the feature of all of these turbo cancers, is that they seem to be on an accelerated course. Same thing with the lymphomas. The lymphomas typically respond very well to chemotherapy. Now you will have your subsets of lymphomas that are very aggressive that will not be as responsive to chemo, but generally speaking, lymphomas respond very well. A lot of them tend to have excellent long-term prognosis. The ones after vaccination, a lot of them don't seem to be responding to chemotherapy, and they seem to be having a much worse prognosis. So leukemias, lymphomas for the young people, the teenagers, people in their 20s, then and also the brain cancers, the glioblastomas, also very young. Then as you move into the 20s and 30s, you start to see breast cancers, but breast cancer is presenting at stage 4, which for women in their 20s is virtually unheard of. When we used to see women in their 30s presenting with stage 4 breast cancer, it's a genetic, it's a genetic familial, issue, a genetic mutation. Women in their 20s presenting at stage 4, and I have many of them. I have many examples. You should see maybe 1 or 2 cases, every few years. I can give you 20 cases, 30 cases, 50 cases, in a matter of hours, just searching on social media. Breast cancers, colon cancers, lung cancers, all presenting at stage 4 in young people in their 20s, 30s. Now, it does happen in older people as well. So there are people in their 40s, 50s, 60s presenting with these extremely aggressive cancers. And what they're told by their oncologists, it's funny because there's a very serious disconnect in terms of when the oncologist initially assesses this cancer with all the appropriate imaging and so on, and they'll give the patient a prognosis, and they'll say, okay, well, you have a prognosis of 3 to 5 years, or what have you, and then the person dies after 2-3 months or after 6 months. There's a huge disconnect in how the oncologists are evaluating these cancers initially and how the patient ends up actually the course that they end up following, which is very accelerated with an extremely poor prognosis, much poorer than what the oncologists will tell them. Also, when the oncologists are preparing to do, let's say, surgical excision, and they've done initial imaging and they think that they can get the tumor out because it hasn't spread, they do the surgery, they repeat imaging, and they find spread. Very often they will find it has already spread to local lymph nodes, or it may have spread distally. So again, they misread the behavior of these cancers, and you find that they're constantly chasing their tail with this management. They're constantly having to readjust how they are managing these cancers because they either grow more rapidly than they expect, or they spread much more aggressively than they would expect.
When I sat in on my ex's first oncology appointment, I asked, is there anything else apart from the chemo and radiation that can be offered? Diet, nutrition, and I was told no, just the standard, none of that. And I was very disappointed, that there's no openness to things like correcting vitamin D deficiency. There's no openness to all the things that fenbendazole, forget it. Ivermectin, forget it. But not even green tea extract, metformin, fenbendazole. Yeah. There's no openness to any of that, and it's tragic, and that's why your work is so important. I would love to see the wellness company come to Australia. When is it going to come? I meant to ask that to Peter McCullough the other day, but because we desperately need it. Where there's no support for the vaccine injured. There's no support or even awareness that we have this problem.
You're absolutely right, and the problem with cancer, especially, is that it has become so based on protocols and guidelines that are approved by these giant associations. Cancer associations, that oncologists are not willing to steer away from these guidelines. And the guidelines will give you the standard chemotherapy, radiation regimens. You might have some approved immunotherapy treatments, but like you said, there'll be nothing about vitamin D, which vitamin D is crucial in addressing cancer, not just prevention, but also management. If you get your vitamin D levels up, there's actually protective effect when it comes to certain cancers like breast cancer, colon cancer. None of that is even looked at or addressed. This doesn't even come into the conversation. And what I find is people who've been vaccinated and they end up with these extremely aggressive stage 4 cancers, they go through the standard management, oncology management, and they quickly hit a dead end. And the oncologists say, well, we have nothing left to offer you. And I'm thinking, okay, you haven't suggested ivermectin. You haven't, high-dose ivermectin. You haven't suggested fenbendazole or mebendazole. You haven't suggested high-dose melatonin. You haven't suggested high-dose vitamin D. You haven't suggested vitamin C infusions. And there's certain kind of mushrooms that people can try. There's CBD oil. I mean, there are so many things that people can try that have shown effectiveness in either preclinical trials, in vitro or in vivo, or in early phase trials, and none of this is even considered. The oncologists will not even tell you that these are options for you to consider. They will just say, sorry, we have nothing left to offer you.
What about intermittent fasting and ketogenesis? What about what's your view about the Warburg effect and it seems so many cancers do use glucose.
Absolutely.
And you can see it on your very scans, your PET scans. They use radio-labeled glucose to find the cancers. So it would make sense that if you have a diet, you try intermittent fasting, you get your control of your blood sugars with or without metformin, that it's going to be a benefit, but no one talks about it. Exactly.
And that's the first thing I suggest to people is eliminate sugar from your diet. Go on some kind of a ketogenic diet. That is actually the first step. That is the first thing I would recommend to anyone with a cancer diagnosis. And you're absolutely right. I've done a lot of PET CT scans with radio-labeled glucose, fluorodeoxyglucose, and the vast majority of cancers light up like a Christmas tree because they love glucose, and they utilize glucose for growth. That is absolutely one of the key things. And again, but it never gets addressed in the oncology meetings, in your appointments. It's never brought up.
A quick
Nakahara about that. Just
Nakahara.
I'm from Melbourne. Sorry, Paul. I'm from Melbourne. And what we saw in Melbourne in the lockdowns and the shooting of people and protesters was like an apprenticeship in communism. And what happened in Melbourne and Australia now is Australia divided into two tribes. A small tribe of people who stubbornly refuse to give up the fact that 2 + 2 = 4, no matter what the government or the mainstream media says. And then this other tribe that now they say 2 + 2 = whatever the government tells us it equals. And we've been watching Canada and we're seeing the same thing. Do you feel that these associations know this is happening, but rather than defying it or calling it out, they're either just resigned to it and going like, well, the powers that be have decided this is happening and just adapt with it, go with it, and hope you survive it, rather than saying they're asleep? They're just, because it doesn't make sense. I can't believe these other doctors, it's that dumb or blind that they can't see what you're seeing. Do you think they're just going, yes, Dr. Makis, I know you're calling it out, but there's no point. Just ride the storm, brother, and we'll reach the other side eventually. Do you think this is what's happening in our countries?
That's an excellent question. I am of the opinion, especially after observing the leadership here in Canada, the medical leadership, especially after observing the behavior of my colleagues, people I went to medical school with. I really do believe most doctors are asleep, and they've really not taken the time to really look at this in depth in any way. They've trusted their peers, they trusted the medical associations, they trusted the peer-reviewed research, which the peer-reviewed research itself is compromised. Now imagine telling people that Lancet is committing fraud, JAMA is committing fraud, Nature is committing fraud, like outright fraud, not like a little bit of fudging here and there, like blatant outright fraud. You can't tell this to your average doctor and be like, all of these associations are engaging in criminal fraud. They wouldn't believe it. And I do believe that the majority of doctors are completely asleep at the wheel. And this actually probably includes many of the bureaucrats. So there are physicians who rise up the ranks of the bureaucracies and end up running these associations like the Canadian Medical Association, for example. There are bureaucrats, and I think most of them are really asleep as well. Now, there may be a small group of individuals who are awake or who know what's going on. Maybe they got fake vaccine cards, because we do have that phenomenon that there are people who've gotten fake vaccine, what do you call those? Those cards, basically. And so I believe there is a small subset of those. And then you're going to have another small subset of people who I think are awake to various degrees, but are just so afraid for their job and pay their mortgage payments, that they will not say anything. They will not rock the boat. But I am personally of the opinion, and I could be wrong, but in terms of from what I've observed, I actually do believe that the majority of doctors are completely asleep, and they wouldn't believe if you told them.
Well, wouldn't that be an act of will to almost remain asleep now? Seeing the amount of evidence they would be seeing. I mean, it wouldn't be easy to remain asleep now. I mean, the amount of deaths, like you said, these unusual cancers, young people dying in their sleep, fit people. I remember the one story that really hit me, you brought it up, Paul, was a cyclist in Scotland who he had a flat tire and he still managed to win the race. He still, even with a flat tire, he still managed to take over and win the race. And then that night he dies of a heart attack, which is just, he's gone. And so for the doctor to see that, and I actually put you another example. Let's talk about the police. This has really rocked our world this week. We've met a funeral director who's trying to get up the courage to speak. He's lost his job because of the vaccination. He said he was turning up initially, picking up dead bodies, and he'd say to the police, "Is another vaccine death?" And the police would go, "Yeah, it's like the 24th one this month," these that they've done. But then these police officers who are watching the carnage would go to the protests and attack the protesters who were saying something's wrong here. We don't. So the police would not be asleep. They would know that the society was literally under attack and then go defend the attackers. That's
I think when it
sleep.
comes to,
that's a different level.
I think for most doctors, they may not be seeing it in their clinics. Now, is it when you've made that decision, is it sort of a willful blindness? Are you thinking that, well, maybe there might be something to it, but I'm not going to look because I've taken 5 vaccines and I've given the vaccines to my kids and I've given them to my entire family and so on. So there may be an element of willful blindness where there might be a slight suspicion, but it's sort of like, I'm not going to look there because if I look there, that might completely destroy my life or change my life. And I'm just not ready for that. So there may be an element of that. But I think a lot of doctors may not be seeing it in their practices. And whenever someone brings up vaccine injury, you hear this a lot from the vaccine injured, is that the doctor just immediately shuts off the conversation, and it doesn't even enter into any kind of a discussion or consideration. And I truly believe that a lot of these doctors, until they're personally impacted, where their family member comes down with an obvious vaccine injury, or they themselves come down with an obvious vaccine injury, then those are the real wake-up moments. And we've seen that, for example, with Dr. Asim Malhotra, whose father was injured by the vaccine, and for him that was a real, a tragic, dramatic moment of realization or awakening. And I think for a lot of people, that's what it's going to take to snap them out of this. Of this illusion or the spell that they're under.
It's great to talk to a Canadian. Your trucker protest in Canada sparked a spontaneous. When we saw what was happening, the same thing happened in Australia. No one organised it. There was like an invisible whistle. We have to go to Canberra, and trucks.
Did you hear about this, Dr. Makis? Did you hear what you Canadians did to us?
Well, I know that the Canadian truckers inspired people in Europe, in the United States. I wasn't aware specifically of Australia. But
we had half a million odd people protesting. We outnumbered the zombies of Canberra. Freedom-loving people, and it was almost like a Woodstock type thing. A spontaneous city appeared of the free, and they couldn't believe that there were so many people around them who felt the same way. They all felt alone. And it was really transformative what happened. And yet we haven't had much dialogue. The physicians in Australia and New Zealand, even, we're only just starting to talk. So it's very important. And yet you still have Justin Trudeau. Everyone else has got rid of their dictator.
I know.
Dan Andrews has left, just Jacinta Ardern, you just name him. And yet that he's like a cockroach. He's like, I don't know how he carries on.
He's extremely unpopular. However, Canada has a significant population that is very much left, I would say far left leaning. And that's a significant, 25-30% of the population is very brainwashed into that sort of leftist propaganda. And it has infected a lot of the academia, the intelligentsia. So people with degrees, a lot of them will identify themselves on the left, and they'll support Justin Trudeau no matter what he does. So it's been difficult because our media is also completely captured. We have completely leftist media. So he has that core support, but his support has been diminishing significantly. So I'm hoping that he's on his sort of last legs and we'll be able to get him out. But he's been an absolute disaster, a catastrophe for Canada. They've done so much damage. The federal Liberal Party, they are extremely corrupt. There's billions and billions of dollars that go missing. They crushed the trucker convoy quite aggressively. They started coming after people's bank accounts. I was looking into closing all my Canadian bank accounts because they started freezing people's bank accounts. They said, we're going to target you. If you supported the trucker convoy, we are going to target your bank accounts. We're going to freeze your bank accounts. Like you mentioned earlier, we basically had a test run of communism in Canada, in Australia, New Zealand,
Ireland,
UK.
Everywhere.
We really had Ireland. We had a test run of communism, and one way I describe it is that when you look at in Canada, for example, we had 6 million unvaccinated Canadians who were not allowed to get on a plane, were not allowed to get on a train, could not travel within the country. I mean, talk about an Iron Curtain. We didn't have, I came from communist Czechoslovakia. We didn't have an Iron Curtain within the communist countries, right? I mean, that is how I managed to escape. My family went to a neighboring communist country, and we applied for United Nations refugee status, ended up in a refugee camp for a year, and that's how we came to Canada. But speaking of the Iron Curtain, Canada experienced its own Iron Curtain within the borders. And of course, the US border was shut, so we couldn't flee. So, I used to joke to my wife, I said, we're going to have to hire some human traffickers to smuggle us across the border into the United States, because we're literally prisoners in our own country. And we see
the borders were shut here too. That when Paul was talking about Canberra, we had people come from all over Australia, including Western Australia, and they couldn't get back. They're actually refugee camps in these remote country towns of people that couldn't get back across their own border in Australia.
Wow.
I mean, it was that insane. But going back to the other candidate, things that we're hearing too, things that are coming here, they're about to bring in a misinformation bill, which is going to silence shows like this from January the 1st. So all online content, and they're going to sue the platforms. So if we put this on Facebook, Facebook will get fined. So they're going to silence us. So we're facing that, and we're told it's a done deal. You apparently already have that in Canada.
Yeah.
And the other thing that we're facing now is people who are vaccine injured, who are ignored or told they've got anxiety, are now going to Melbourne to euthanize themselves. This is people who are just giving in because it's too painful. But euthanasia is going rampant in your country, I believe. Is that true?
I believe Canada is probably the #1 country in the world in terms of the looseness of the requirements that you have to meet to be approved for medical assistance in dying or euthanasia. I think we're leading the charge in the world in terms of who can get access to this. Now, I'll tell you something that's quite frightening that's been put on the table a couple of months ago by the federal Canadian government. There's a committee composed mostly of Liberal members of Parliament, but there's a couple of Conservative members of Parliament there as well. And they're proposing two additions to this medical assistance in dying. Number one is that minors, children, can have the final say in getting euthanized or medical assistance in dying without parental consent.
What
That's
age?
number one. There is no age cutoff. So what they do is they've introduced this concept for several years now called a mature minor. And a mature minor has no age cutoff. It is purely in by the determination of the presiding doctor. So if you have a 10-year-old in front of you and you're a far left doctor and you say, well, this 10-year-old is very mature, this is a mature minor, then that 10-year-old child can make the final decision for medically assisted suicide without parental consent. This is what they've put on the table. They want this approved within the year. That's number one. Number two is they've now also proposed that people with any kind of mental health diagnosis or illness can agree to euthanasia if they have no other medical conditions. And so you can imagine how this could be potentially abused. You could say, well, I'm suffering from depression. Okay, we'll approve you for medical assistance in dying. Just like that, with no other medical conditions. And so the Trudeau government has put both of these recommendations on the table. They want this approved within the year. And so this is another broad expansion of the eligibility for this, euthanasia.
It's dangerous. It's not what doctors do. Doctors don't take life, we're meant to preserve life. It's really distressing. And when they talk about mental health in children, and then I saw a paper where they were crowing that you could do MAID and then get the body on ice so it can be used as for organ donation. So you've got to wonder what are the conflicts of interest and motivations behind these protocols. Either way, we've had such a breach of ethics around COVID. But you mentioned informed consent. Myself and a couple of other people who were attacked in Australia, we set up a website called lighthousedeclaration.org. And the idea of the declaration was just, hang on, guys, let's just, rather than all the division, let's talk about basic principles, that we should end the censorship of professionals, that we should end the coercion, and return bodily autonomy as core principles. Informed consent, basic, still on our books as legal principles, and yet somehow our institutions have walked away from some of the core principles of our society. And the last part of the declaration is that we should get the globalists out of our healthcare and let doctors be doctors and decide what is best for the patient in front of them, rather than listening to some anonymous bureaucrat or protocol because the protocols have been disastrous, and there's no accountability. If the AI says you've been diagnosed with a positive COVID test, we're not going to give you antibiotics, and then they go to get intubated, they get run deafness also known as remdesivir, and they get the predictable hospital-acquired or post-viral pneumonia. And in previous years, we would have treated it, but this in the last few years, the protocols say no, and so it's a disaster. Just if we just return to some basic principles, basic ethical and moral principles, we would already be miles ahead of where we currently are.
Well, one of the tragedies is that, as you mentioned, all of these ethical principles are still on the books. They're still, listed in the code of conduct of the various regulatory bodies, the medical colleges, but no one abides by them anymore. I think one of the tragedies of the COVID pandemic is we've lost all medical ethics that guided the profession over the last, since World War II. I think we've lost all of it. No one is abiding by these ethical principles anymore, especially if you are following a state-approved propaganda. So, for example, I'll give you an example. We had a doctor in Ontario who was giving COVID vaccines to 4-year-olds and 3-year-olds back when they were not approved in that age group, when it was only approved for ages 5 and plus. This doctor was giving hundreds of vaccine doses to 4-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 2-year-olds, whoever wanted to. And not only was he not sanctioned by the colleges for doing something illegal and unethical, but he was celebrated. He was celebrated in the mainstream media as a hero, and not so much as a complaint from the regulatory bodies, because he was enacting state-approved propaganda. And despite the fact that he was harming children, it didn't matter. He was allowed to do so because he was acting in service of the state.
And this is how we break trust. This is how we destroy our institutions. This is how we destroy the trust in our institutions. And yeah, I think you can see the fall off in vaccine numbers and booster numbers. So I think people are seeing, including the doctors, are seeing the harm personally, up close and personal. And that's why I'm more interested now in how we rebuild our institutions. I think these ones have shown themselves to be not fit for purpose, and I don't bother with them. I think we have to look forward.
Sorry, Paul. Before we fix the institutions, though, surely we have to change the perception of the public, because you said you're from Czechoslovakia, and when this all was happening, I read an essay. I think it's called "The Power and the Powerless" by Václav Havel, who was a freedom fighter, playwright, and became president of your country. And in it, he said, if the media is ignoring you, set up your own media, which is why I set up this podcast. And I see these podcasts all over Australia. So his philosophy is working everywhere. And it must be powerful because they're silencing us all. So they realize we're a powerful force. But what he also said, and or I think I heard him say it, but I've interviewed people from all over the Iron Curtain, everywhere. They all say you cannot comply your way out of this. In fact, they literally say it with tears. You can't do it. Do you think not just your doctors, but all the people working for the government, everyone is pushing it, are somehow trying to comply their way through it, thinking it will go? And you are simply going, you can't do it. It's over. You've got to stop. Because it's trying to understand why the survival instinct of humans isn't kicking in. Because they're being attacked. They're being killed. At some point, you would expect them to go, hey, whoa, what is going on here? But it's not happening. The parents of kids that die are not coming and ranting and raving. So, no, sorry, I sort of lost the content of the question, but this is where we seem to be. How do you think we can change the perception of the everyday people so that by osmosis they rise and the institutions are basically destroyed from the bottom or reinvented from the ground up?
You're absolutely right. You cannot comply your way out of something like this. And certainly there was no complying your way out of communism. That's not how communism fell. Communism fell. You had the solidarity movement that started in Poland with mass non-compliance, and basically crippling the institutions with non-compliance. I've one fascinating thing that I've noticed is that it is a lot of people from the former Eastern European countries, former communist countries, that are trying to raise the alarm, are yelling the loudest. So in Canada, you've got Pastor Arthur Pawlowski from former communist Poland.
Yeah, we had
in
one.
Europe.
Yeah.
In Europe, you have members of parliament from Romania, members of parliament from Croatia. These are former communist countries. They're the ones, exposing the corruption and the criminality in the European Parliament. You've got also Christine Anderson, who I think is amazing as well. And I always say, get yourself a friend from a former communist country, because you're going to do well, because they will be the first ones to speak out, because we've seen this, we've lived through it, this sort of blind trust in government that a lot of people have in the West, I think is what's ending up harming so many people, and why so many people are now succumbing to injuries, having complied with the vaccines. In medicine, this idea of go along to get along. Yes, I will take the 2 shots, and hopefully, yes, I can still, make my mortgage payments or live a lavish lifestyle. In some cases, doctors get paid extremely well in Canada. You've got average salaries of $300,000 to $400,000 a year. Very few people are willing to give that up. But, when you comply, it only brings more devastating and more totalitarian measures, because now in British Columbia and Canada, they are rolling out vaccine mandates again. They've encoded it into the Health Professions Act as a condition of now keeping your license. So you won't just lose your job if you don't take the government approved vaccines. You will actually lose your medical license. And that is an extra draconian step that is now being implemented in Canada this year. We know that mandates are coming. They're coming back. They're going to force the doctors, and they're going to go through the doctors. And you know why? Because they complied. They complied this whole time. They didn't stand up in any significant numbers. So they're just going to keep pushing and pushing. They're going to tell them, you're going to have to take the new booster shot, because the old booster shots doesn't matter how many booster shots you've taken in the past. We've got a new variant. The old booster shots don't work. You're going to have to take more of these vaccines. So
the apprenticeship worked, and now they're going to go for the PhD in compliance.
Michael, I've got to get my kid to his exam.
Yeah, no worries.
I've really enjoyed this conversation. I hope we can pick it up again sometime if they'll let us.
I hope so.
Blessings to you. Thank you for coming on, and
thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Take care. I just have a few minutes with you, Dr. Makis, just on a humanitarian level. It's just how old were you when you left Czechoslovakia?
I was 9 years old. But even I remember my parents telling me, we discuss at home, don't talk about it at school because daddy might go to jail. I do remember standing in bread lines. I do remember I remember the empty shelves. But that was our normal. It was normal to have empty grocery shelves. It was normal for people, for the entire town, to line up when something came into stock, some basic thing that was difficult to get, toilet paper, toothpaste, you name it. People would line up around the block so that they could get their hands on, because they don't know when the next time they could get their hands on it. I remember the Iron Curtain. I remember the refugee camp that we had to stay in as we were trying to flee communism, and the idea that if we didn't make it out of the refugee camp, if for whatever reason we were sent back to Czechoslovakia, that my father would end up in jail. So, these are things that even as a kid, that sticks with you.
How did you escape?
Well, so it was interesting because you could travel to other communist countries. There was freedom of movement within the communist sphere. And so what people would do, Yugoslavia was one of these countries in the 1980s that was a bit more, it was trying to lean towards capitalism and was trying to sort of shift away from communism. And that was a place, I don't know how my parents found this out, but that was a place where you could apply for refugee status and they wouldn't send you back. They would put you in one of their refugee camps and they'll say, okay, take your shot and see if you can get a plane ticket and get approved. So what we would have to do is we would have to do interviews at embassies. So we would have to do interviews at the Canadian embassy or the Australian embassy or the US embassy. Those were the three countries that were taking refugees from those United Nations camps. And my parents just took their chances.
Do you want to hear something astounding? We have people, because all I do is travel the country interviewing people about what's going on. We have people over here now who have no ancestry with Russia, who are emigrating to Russia for freedom.
That's incredible. That just goes to show you that there's something really, really wrong. I've heard of people immigrating back, or I shouldn't say immigrating, leaving back from Canada back to their countries of origin, whether it's Poland or Croatia, Serbia,
Poland's
Russia. It's people are moving back. They're moving back.
This is a different. They go back because they know it, but this mob is these people now, teachers and stuff, are emigrating there. I mean, our website, our servers are in Russia because it protects our freedom of speech. I mean, we're in insane times. But the trouble
It
is
really
now,
is incredible.
you were in Czechoslovakia and you had the West to flee to for freedom. And I interviewed a Romanian woman the other day who their family escaped also, or her father escaped to Yugoslavia from Romania. But we have nowhere to go. I mean, I know you go to Russia, but Russia or Mexico is not going to take all of us. We have nowhere to go. There's literally, do you feel like humanity itself is facing this crisis, that humanity itself could be enslaved by this ideology where basically you switch off your survival instinct, you switch off your sense of right, or your basic sense of right and wrong, and just do whatever the government says and hope that they don't come after you?
Well, I mean, we are definitely in that danger, and you're right. I mean, there really is nowhere to escape to, and that's why I really don't like to talk about something like Nuremberg trials or Nuremberg 2.0, because again, it's who are the allies, right? It's who are the powers that are going to save us. It's this pharmaceutical mafia, this big pharma cartel has infected the bureaucracies of all the major Western nations. So it's I think we have to fight for our countries. I love Canada. I'm a Canadian citizen. And I'm willing to fight for Canada. Now, of course, I have to weigh the risks to my family. If it comes to the point where there's a risk of me ending up in jail and my children not being able to, be taken care of, then I may have to flee. And that's always, unfortunately, in the back of my mind. But, I want to fight for Canada, and to reclaim Canada from these totalitarian entities, and these these corrupt bureaucracies that run the systems, the healthcare systems, the education systems, but really are not. They're unelected. They they don't. They're almost their own entities, and so I think it's worth fighting fighting for our country. For people are now trying to take back the school boards and get elected to the school board so they can actually impact what the children are being taught, because we have problems in education. We're gonna have to figure out alternative. Yeah, we're gonna have to figure out alternative healthcare systems, and there are, clinics starting to arise with alternative healthcare being provided. So I think that's the way forward.
2 seconds, I just lost my camera. There's sorry, Doc.
That's okay, but I think a lot of people are awakening, and we may not be at the point yet of sort of a mass awakening where we can actually, either just dissolve some of these corrupt institutions or take some of them back or build new ones. But I think we're getting there. I actually think there's a tremendous momentum in terms of awakening humanity and those who want the best for their families and for their kids, as opposed to serving some, corrupt global entities located in another country. I really think we have that momentum. I think we just need to keep pushing and keep fighting.
Well, I think you're doing an amazing job. I thank you for sharing your time with us here. I actually think it's really important it's really great to get doctors from here and doctors from there, from Canada to speak. There's so few of you, and I think it's good for spreading hope and courage across our countries, because there's no one coming from us, but we are. One thing I've noticed over here, because I don't think anyone in Australia has met as many of the freedom movement as I have, because I go to the different towns meeting them. There is a deep, unusual, egalitarian bond between freedom fighters over here. They bicker a bit, but there's no status. There's just they get together. And one thing that's happening over here, Poland had a symbol, the solidarity, the candle in the window. And when we were traveling around, we were saying we need a symbol. We need our own symbol to unite the freedom movement. And that's not actually a movement within itself, but an overriding thing. We asked the community, and we had sent loads and loads of things people sent to us. Finally, the one we went with, which is a lot of the big groups are going with now, is that 832. And the marketing is, people go, what's 832? And we say, Google it. But if you Google it, it comes to, and I'm not overtly religious, but it goes to a quote from the Bible that says, the truth shall set you free. And what people do now is you're walking down the street with an 832 cap or an 832 badge, and then you have people going, hey, brother, how you going? And you find out, and people are doing stickers on bumper cars and graffiti on walls, and there's big graffiti in some places, and suddenly it's like a form of resistance. It's because we're living in a tsunami of bullshit, and we want the truth. And now the other thing that's happening over here, which is incredible, is a small group in a tiny town said, we're going to have an 832 gathering, which means they found this old caravan park, and all these like-minded people came from 400 or 500 kilometers away, and for 2 days they hang out, and they go from being a tribe like this to a connected tribe like this. I've been to a few of them. People, we have this one old doctor, he was like in his 70s. He was talking to 4 o'clock in the morning. He couldn't go to bed, but he just wanted to talk and talk and talk. But they're sharing ideas and spreading ideas and capitalizing on ideas. And these are easy to set up. So spread the thing, 832. And the other thing too with culture is, I'll share the song at the end of this and send the link through to you. We met a man who was unvaccinated, knew nothing of the freedom movement at all. His whole family didn't want anything to do with him, and he stayed sane by writing these songs that his family and friends wouldn't listen to, protest songs. And one of his songs called The Crime, because he found me, just stumbled across me. And I said, you're not alone, mate. You got a tribe. And he, after being upset, he played me this song. We've had him on stage where he's wowing people, But now we've shared it online. In the last 24 hours, it's had 200,000 hits, all in America and Canada. And this is why I think the cultural war now, it's time for the artists to rise up. You doctors are there fighting, us other freedom fighters and independent media are fighting. But I think maybe to cross this divide between those who say 2 + 2 = 4 and those who are too scared of the truth, the bridge might be the artists, as the artists remind us who we are as human beings and try to discover why we're doing what we're doing and how we get out of here. So we believe the culture war is upon us now. So a big call out to any Canadian artists that are watching, reach out to us. We want the artists to join the doctors like yourself who are so brave. I'm in awe of you, to Dr. Makis.
Well,
I'm
thank
in
you very
awe of your
much.
courage.
Thank you very
Yeah,
much for having
so
me on. I appreciate it.
no problem. It's an honor to share so much time with you, and I wish you the best. And we'll share this, and I'll cut it up. I've got notes where I'll cut up, and let's hope we just chip away, chip away, chip away, and hopefully we get to a place where we are free again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Take care, brother. No
Take care.
problem.